bigger than Conor versus Khabib. That's what Dana White said, is that this pay-per-view, UFC 254, is trending bigger than McGregor versus Khabib. The biggest pay-per-view of all time in UFC history. Matt, do you believe him for 1 second on this?
No. Flat out no. That's going to be my answer to that. I think it's Dana being Dana, trying to sell pay-per-views to get people excited. Per usual. We see him say this all the time before a pay-per-view, where it's some form of, this is trending to be one of the best shows of the year, or this is trending. It's always, this is trending. And that's like a nice little slick way to say, hey, a lot of people are watching this and you should be watching too. So be sure to buy that pay-per-view. That's essentially what that is when he says that. But to say that this card in particular is going to surpass Khabib versus McGregor, which did 2.4 million, that is crazy talk to me. I don't think it's going to get, I think it'll be up there because Khabib has quite the following. He is a global superstar, but is it 2.4 million in a fight that does not have any controversy outside of its champion versus interim champion? I don't know.
Yeah, it is a big fight. It's arguably the biggest fight of the year, but does it have that same, build up? Does it have that same, we're going to see McGregor, who's had really only been tested once by Nate Diaz, whom he beat at that point, go up against an undefeated just monster that is Nurmagomedov. Here's the thing about White's comments. Like you said, yes, complete selling technique, 100%. It does not help that there are certain individuals out there, you and I know who they are, who like to give out pay-per-view numbers, saying that they have sources on pay-per-view numbers that they later admit on their podcasts are just Dana White. So gotta take it with a grain of salt, just a little bit. And ever since the new UFC ESPN deal happened, where pay-per-views have been through, exclusively through ESPN Plus, we've never had those objective numbers, and getting those metrics is going to be hard. The best you're going to get are the one or two journalists out there who are claiming they have sources, and really it's just Dana. That's it. And there really is no way to know, as it was before, where you could go to all of these different vendors and sites and get a couple of sources here and there and kind of aggregate, okay, this is the range that we have. Dave Meltzer was notorious for being able to do that. Obviously, he did that back in the day with WWE pay-per-views as well. So, I mean, that all made sense. This, now you basically closed the floodgates of getting any semblance of accurate numbers. So how do we know if this is going to be a big pay-per-view or not? Yes, Khabib has come into his own as a star. He's been trending even this week on Twitter and various social media sites. And he's got a massive following, especially in Russia and Dagestan, which is most, if not the entire reason they're doing this pay-per-view at the time that they're doing. Because if you notice, there's the 2 p.m. Eastern start time. Well, that translates to about 10 p.m. in Dagestan and Russia. So that makes sense. But if you really want to know if this is going to do big numbers or not, and we'll get to our predictions here in a minute, but if you want to know if it actually did big numbers or not, you gotta go to Disney. Every time, I know, right?
Yeah,
gotta go to Disney. Every time that there has been a big pay-per-view, which is, I think, been 2 or 3 times with Conor being 2 of them, they have said on their earnings call to investors, like, hey, we're very pleased at how this pay-per-view did. They talk about the buys because they want people to, see that their streaming services, which ESPN Plus is owned by Disney, they want to see that that's doing well. Especially now, after last week, they essentially made a giant statement saying, you know what, we're getting away from theme parks. We're getting away from more of the retail Disney stores and all of that stuff. And we're really focusing heavily on streaming moving forward. They are going to be touting any good news that they can. But they also are not going to pull a Dana and say, like, hey, we got, 2 million pay-per-views here, if they don't actually have those numbers, because those can be audited. That could technically be considered fraud. So they're not going to tout numbers unless they have verified proof and they are credible. So if this pay-per-view does do big numbers, Disney's going to talk about it. I guarantee it. If Disney doesn't talk about it, I don't think it broke 1 million. Straight up. I can't imagine it did. So.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, when Dana said, it's I can go back to like the last Amanda Nunes fight where all he did was say they're very happy. Like people at Disney are very happy. Like he wouldn't give us a range of the pay-per-view buys. He just said everybody's really happy. ESPN's really happy right now, and that's code for I don't want to tell you guys what we really did because it was probably not as good as we were hoping for. That's the way I interpreted it, at least. But I've always been on this side of the fence when it comes to the pay-per-view buy conversation. It's interesting for us as media to understand where they're at when it comes to pay-per-view buys. What I don't like is this conversation carrying over into the fan base in that affecting whether or not you are going to be buying as a fan. If you are just a fan and you want to see a fight, buy the fight. Why does it matter if it does 2 million, if it does 10 million, or if it does 10,000? If there are two fighters that you as a fan want to see fight, buy the pay-per-view. Like, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Like, you are sitting at home, you want to be entertained by watching the fight, buy the pay-per-view. I just, because I've had too many conversations with fans that really don't rely on, journalism for anything, or not journalists in any capacity, having these in-depth conversation about pay-per-view buys. Like, why? Why are you concerning yourself with these things? It just doesn't make sense to me. But I completely agree, man. Like, we're never going to see accurate numbers anymore, especially behind this ESPN Plus, double paywall thing. Like, it's just going to be whatever the narrative that they want to push as how well they're doing. And when it comes to like investors and things like that, yeah, you're going to have to go to Disney, like you said, to kind of get a real idea of what's really happening behind the scenes. But to the general public that is tuning into the UFC and tuning in, to an MMA junkie, update or whatever have you from Dana White, it's always going to be sunshine and rainbows. And that's just how they're going to always portray it.
Yeah, no. And again, you've got the other thing that just infuriates me is people see some numbers from those one or two sources we've talked about, and they take them as gospel. They take them as, nope, this is what they are. And I can't stress enough that Disney should be your fact check. If, for example, talk about Masvidal versus Usman, right? Originally, it was 1.3 million. I believe the original report was 1.3 million domestic and then said 1.3 million worldwide or whatever. Worldwide, yeah, that maybe makes sense. But even then, even if it was 900,000 or whatever domestic, Disney didn't say a word about it. That to me makes me think those numbers are probably a little bit higher than they actually are, the numbers being reported. Because my guess is if you're in the 600, 700,000 range, that's good, but you're not going to go tout to your investors about it. If you're close to 1 million, especially given that it was right in the heart of the pandemic and every theme park that Disney owned was still closed, you're probably going to mention it in some form or fashion. So again, you're going to see numbers reported. I guarantee it. 3 or 4 days after this, you're going to see numbers reported from a couple of various sites, from one person in particular that I have very strong feelings about, but is what it is. You've got to fact check that. No matter what is said right now, make sure that on the next earnings call, you could look out for a special release from Disney, because if it's that big, if it beats Khabib versus Conor, you bet your ass they're going to do a special release that touts it. But otherwise, you can listen to the next earnings call and see if they say anything. Because if they don't, didn't break 1 million. I'm telling you right now. If they don't in this climate, it didn't come close to 1 million. That all being said.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100% on that. And I'm trying to picture how this card could even approach that, considering Khabib versus McGregor. Obviously, McGregor, the biggest superstar on the planet when it comes to the MMA world, especially at the time. some people have lost interest in Conor, but this was like the fight, like in terms of his MMA peak, so to speak, right? He goes out there and fights Khabib. If he beats Khabib, oh my goodness, he's the greatest ever, like all time, put him on Mount Rushmore and all that kind of jazz, right? But also underneath that, you had better fights on the main card that you were paying for. You had Tony Ferguson versus Anthony Pettis. Hell of a fight. Dominic Reyes was on that card. OSP. OSP is not the most popular fighter in the world, but MMA fans are very familiar with OSP. Derek Lewis versus Volkov, 2 heavyweights. Everybody loves Derek Lewis, right? And then, of course, Michelle Watterson, Felice Herrig. Like, it is a much better card. In this particular card, it's the main event. Khabib, Gaethje, Whitaker, Cannonier is your co-main. Personally, for more hardcore fans, there's going to be people that like the Volkov versus Walt Harris fight. I love Walt Harris as a fighter. I love him as a person. One of the coolest dudes in MMA. If anybody has ever had the chance to meet him, like, you would agree, right? But outside of that, like, there's names that the general public aren't going to know for the most part, right? So that's gonna go into the decision making for some people. Sure, some people would buy just for the main event. There's a lot of people that do that. But I think the totality of the other card, UFC 229, was just better and had more interest on it. Outside of Conor and Khabib. I just don't see this card living up to that. And no matter how good we all think that main event is going to be. So it's going to be interesting to see what it actually does, or at least what we are told to believe what it does, because again, we're not going to know the exact numbers, but I just don't see it happening. And if it does happen, let's just flip the script here for a second. And let's just say that it does surpass that. That says a lot more about Khabib and his star power and than what we, could have ever anticipated. Downside to that is he said he's retiring after his next fight. So it's like, what do we do with this newfound fame, this new golden boy and Khabib, if he goes out there and starches Justin Gaethje and beats the pay-per-view number? Like, could you imagine the UFC and Dana just begging Khabib to stay around? And Khabib's not that type of guy that's just going to bend to the whims of the UFC. So it's going to be a lot of interesting conversations if that does come about.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where Khabib's going to do what he wants to do. You could, especially keeping him under contract, you could always entertain a Floyd match or something of that nature, right? I mean, I know we roll our eyes at it, but that would do money. That would do money for days, and that's the truth of it. There's always the GSP fight too. I think that's, if he's really going to retire at 30-0, I think that's really your only card if you really want to maximize Khabib's star power, is you have to do GSP versus Khabib. But to go back to another point that you said about the rest of the card being a little bit weaker, because I would agree with you here. One thing I will say, and shout out to I don't know what title to give him other than the economics professor of MMA, Paul Gift, who did a study on fighter marginal revenue product, basically trying to say, how much are fighters actually drawing? How do, consumers decide whether or not to buy pay-per-view? And he found in that study that about, I want to say it's 94% of decisions on buying the pay-per-view pretty much attribute to the main and co-main. So you're right. There are people that won't buy it for the rest of the card, but in terms of actually affecting the pay-per-view numbers, it's probably negligible, just because, the hardcores are going to all buy it. And then to really get those casual people, they're all, looking for the main and co-main. Similar to, I'm not a big boxing guy, but if I see a Triple G versus Canelo, oh yeah, I'll buy that, or the Charlo brothers. Yeah, sure. Okay. You've got me. I'm enough of a semi-casual. Okay. But other than that, I don't probably know half of the rest of the card. Or if I do, I know a couple names, but I'm really buying for the main or co-main. So it really is going to test Khabib's star power for sure on this one. And yeah, I don't know. I'm with you. I'm not sure how it's going to approach that number. Personally, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give it just because it is a pandemic, the worldwide number is important too, because remember, unlike America, some other countries have locked down much more strictly and people, can't do anything else. So that's going to affect those other countries that are really under strict lockdowns. I'm going to give it 800,000. I think he's got enough star power. I think Gaethje was exciting enough during the, that first event back where he fought Ferguson that he really drew some people in. I think this is 800,000, but that's tops. That's tops. I could easily see somewhere in the range of 600 or less. We've got the COVID bump still, but I don't know. I think you're probably in the 600 to 800,000 range. What about you, sir?
I'm going to go a little bit higher than that. I think we're looking at over $1 million. But it's not going to be close to 2.4. I think we're looking at like 1.2, something like around that range right there. 1.2, 1.4 at the high end for me. Just mainly because we have Khabib, and he's headlined cards before, right? On a pay-per-views. We don't have the exact numbers of the Poirier fight. But we do know that the TV ratings, the prelims did 220,000, according to Tapology's numbers here, right? So, and you look at Gaethje, what he did in his headlining opportunity against Tony Ferguson, that did 700,000. So just Gaethje Ferguson, which is a solid fight. No, go ahead.
Remember, those are one particular source's numbers.
True.
Gotta remember that.
True.
Yes. Assuming those are true. Yes.
Okay. Asterisks next to all these numbers. Yes.
Fair enough.
For sure. But so 700,000 on a Gaethje card, and Tony Ferguson, we don't know how well he draws, particularly on his own. So this is kind of like one of those things where I think if you kind of combine those numbers with what we think Khabib did, Khabib's been on the 2.4 card. So if Khabib can bring in just half of that audience on his own, I mean, I'm putting it at 1.2. That's where I'm setting it at 1.4 in the high end. Again, we're never going to know for real, but that's what I would expect to hear being floated around, this time next week.
Yeah. And that's not, it's one of those things where that's definitely not unreasonable, I would say, especially again, that first event being back, I think had some extra numbers. So that was like the first sporting event back, right? I think one thing that will hurt this card is because it has a 2 p.m. start time Eastern, you're going to have college football, especially Big Ten comes back this Saturday too. That's going to drain away from, at least from American fans. I think it will be a richer worldwide number for sure, though. And I think that's really the X factor is what can he pull in from other countries? Because I think that's where his real star power lies at this point is, he is a well-known name in MMA, no doubt. And he transcends that to some, mainstream popular culture stuff, but he's not a McGregor where, everybody knows who he is. And he, that start time, I don't know. So we'll see. I don't think those numbers are unreasonable, though. I do think 2.4 million is ridiculous. I think that's just, especially with college football going on, because I know several people that ponied up for Conor versus Khabib that were super excited about it. That when I told them Khabib was fighting this weekend, they were like, "Oh, that's cool," but it's in the middle of college football Saturday. What are you going to do? So, it's maybe you double stream it. I could see a couple of people doing that, but I also think that those types of people generally don't go through legal means, at least who I know, when they're double streaming stuff. So,
No, that's true. I guess when it comes to the football, at least in terms of this week in particular, there's no huge like marquee matchups on the college football world, but that doesn't really mean all that much when it comes to college football fans, because they're going to tune in, especially if you're a top 15 team, you're going to watch every game and you're not going to miss very many plays. So regardless of who they're playing, Alabama, for example, is playing Tennessee, and that's not the biggest game on their schedule, but it is an SEC rival. So there will be some tension there from fans watching. They're going to want to tune into every play Even if Alabama gets up 30 in the first half. That's how college football fans are. They watch the entire games. They're cheering. They're with their buddies, whether it be a small party, hopefully socially distant, following coronavirus guidelines wherever they may be. Yeah, right. We know what these college kids are doing. But
Texas.
It's exactly. Oh my God, the stories. But it's going to be tough, man. It's going to be a tough sell. Like you said, with college football going on, and we really just don't know, like, with this card being what it is outside of the top 2 fights.
Yeah. No, I mean, who knows? And I want you to go ahead, if you're watching this, hit that like, subscribe button, and give us your prediction. And tell us, are we off here? Are we right? I think we're pretty good. Do any of you truly believe that it's going to beat Conor versus Khabib? Because I'd love to talk to you about where you're getting that math and logic from. I'd love to hear the rationale there, because I can't see it. Neither can Matt, it seems like. So hit that like, subscribe, drop the comments below. You know what to do. We'll see. Either way, great fight. Great card. Good time.